Welcome in this third and final video about the Korean actor Han Sung-ki. In this previous series of video of retrospective, we had reviewed his career from his very beginning as a child actor at the end of the 50s. Then in the second video, we had covered what was his golden age in a way during the 80s and the 90s, and we had started working our way into his filmography in the early 2000s. We had stopped around 2004, 2005, and now we will continue until this very day, because Han Sung-ki is still active nowadays. He's quite an old man now, but he remains very productive nonetheless. Without further ado, let's dive in with a movie from 2005 called Duelist, directed by Lee Myung-se. Lee Myung-se, you are certainly aware of him already because we talked about two of his previous films in the second part of this series. That was Gagman, the atrocious Gagman, and the cop and gangster films Nowhere to Hide, much more interesting film than his first comedy drama. And if you have liked Nowhere to Hide, there is a good chance that you will like Duelist as well, because it's basically the same formula. If you remember well, Nowhere to Hide was a classic cop and gangster story, but with an added value of dynamism and inventivity because of the very creative direction and editing. And basically Lee Myung-se tries to do exactly the same thing with Duelist in the world of wuxia period action film. It works really well in Nowhere to Hide. I thought it made for a very interesting film. If you have liked what he did in 1999, there is a good chance you will like what he did in 2005 with Duelist. But I must confess that it feels a bit worn out as well. Basically, there is the same qualities and the same problems between the two films. The qualities, it's obviously some very inventive, some very creative ideas when it comes to the direction, when it comes to the editing. For example, during the fights, we have several fights between the main character played by Ji-won and her nemesis lover, and the fights there are treated quite differently from any other action film, because the way they move around each other is really like a dance. Usually it's kind of the cliche to say that about Asian action scenes, that it's like a dance, but here it's really meant to look like a dance, and at the same time it incorporates also some kind of animal sexual ritual, these kind of things, which may sound weird, but it actually gives a pretty interesting result on the screen. And there are a lot of these kind of ideas all over the film, some more inspired than the others. There is also, for example, a fight scene with Han Sung-ki in a tea house, in a restaurant, and the lighting is very interesting because it's very dark, but we have a light only coming from the windows which are very narrow, so it gives a lot of contrast visually during the action scene. So it's mostly things like this which makes it interesting. Sometimes, as I said, it's not so successful. I'm thinking here at the very first action scene, which happens in the market with a lot of people chasing each other, and it seems like it's inspired by rugby match or American football, this kind of sport, with sound effect taken from this kind of sport. I wasn't convinced by that one, I must confess, but in general it's interesting. It does bring something a bit more passionate, something more cerebral also in a way, compared to your average period action film. but it has the same problem also that Nowhere to Hide, which was a very basic story. The story here is actually Ah Ji-won and An Sung-ki playing two cops during the Joseon dynasty, so the last dynasty of the Korean history. And they are investigating some kind of a counterfeit money ring. And that's pretty much it. Really, there is really not much more than that. And that's a limitation, because the film is fairly long and it has difficulty to sustain itself just on the editing, on the direction, without having really something interesting to tell. For the record, Duelist is actually an adaptation of manhwa, so a Korean manga, which was then made into a TV series with Ah Ji-won in the leading part, which was a success. And so Duelist was the last and most prestigious, in a way, adaptation of this source material. Not a bad film. I think there is enough creativity there to keep you interested, but this formula that Lee Myung-se had initiated with Nowhere to Hide, I thought was starting to feel a bit old. It was not as successful as in Nowhere to Hide, and maybe Lee Myung-se should have started to do something a bit different. I'm using the conditional here because he actually stopped his directing career with this film. As far as I know, I didn't make very deep research. Maybe he's still working on TV or elsewhere, I'm not sure. But as a film director, Duelist is his last film. So another director from the generation of the 80s, 90s who bite the dust with the early 2000s. As I already stated, I think in the second installment of this retrospective, the transition between the 80s, 90s and the 2000s was very difficult for the director of this era, and very few managed. Most of them kind of disappeared during the early 2000s, replaced by a new generation of filmmakers. An Sung-ki in the film is actually surprising because he is a supporting actor. The main actor is Ah Ji-won. He's really just there as a comedy sidekick, basically. He's there to crack jokes. He's there to act in a funny way, not as far as Gagman, fortunately, but that's an interesting take. It's interesting to see that with every film he did with Lee Myung-se, he always had very different characters and very different way to perform them. So for that alone, that's really interesting to see, and I think he does a good job here. He is actually indeed quite funny, and he makes for a good duo with Ah Ji-won. So pretty good performance in my eyes from An Sung-ki for a film which is certainly worth checking out, even if it has some flaws which are pretty obvious by that point. In 2006, An Sung-ki is in Hanbando, directed by Kang Woo-suk, the director of the very good Silmido. But I'm not going to say that Hanbando is very good, because that's the complete opposite. It's a disaster. Hanbando sees An Sung-ki playing once again after the romantic president, the president of Korea. But while in The Romantic President, An Sung-ki was all charming, here he is angry, he is not happy, he is determined to go against Japan. And why is it such? It's because in this film, North Korea and South Korea are getting very close to each other. They are initiating a railway itinerary which go between the two countries, so in a way helping to the unification of both countries. But then this good news is cancelled by Japan. Japan which tells the Korean government, the South Korean government, that they actually have the right to such a railway track based on a treaty which was signed with the last king of Korea, so before Korea became a Japanese colony. And so they want to prevent this warming of relationship between the two Korea. But the president is convinced that they are actually trying to manipulate him. They are jealous of Korean rise in power, and so he's going to investigate, and they are going to look for the seal of the Korean king of the time, because supposedly he used a fake seal when he signed this treaty, so that would void the treaty, and so Japan would be wrong, and Korea could continue to go into the road for unification. If you are a bit aware of South Korean cinema, especially during the early 2000s, you know that there had been quite a few of this kind of very nationalistic film being produced. I'm thinking here, for example, of 2009 Lost Memories, which was atrocious, and that's the same with Anbando. Anbando is like the ultimate of stupid Korean nationalism, if you allow me to put it this way. And interestingly enough, it's actually a kind of nationalism which comes mostly from the left of the Korean political compass. Of course, it's also from the ultra-right, but this idea that both Korea, North and South, would be able to unite and to reunify, and that it's actually Japan and the US who are preventing this from happening. This is an idea which is more prevalent in the left-oriented political parties in South Korea. And so here it's really like the ultimate fantasy of this way of thinking made into wannabe entertaining film. I think it's a completely naive and stupid idea, to be honest. Not that Japan has been all good towards Korea. Obviously, there is a lot of things which can be blamed on Japan during the time of the colony, but after that, Japan didn't really interest itself that much into what happened to Korea post-war, and they actually helped the development, the economic development of South Korea for a while. So the idea that they would try so much to prevent Korea from becoming stronger, that they would even threaten to come militarily to do an invasion of Korea in order to prevent that, is completely ludicrous. And I think it's even worse morally if you consider this idea that, which is put forward by the film, to make a parallel between what happened during the colonial time or the end of the imperial dynasty in Korea, and what would happen in contemporary times. I think it's kind of insulting for everybody involved to do something like that. Obviously, there are other things at play which prevent North and South to reunite. While you can certainly criticize Japan and the US for some aspects of their policy, the idea that they are all bad and it's the all good Korean from both sides of the frontier is extremely simplistic. So just for that alone, I think that the movie is a very frustrating and unpleasant viewing. And it tries to be entertaining, obviously, because it was kind of a blockbuster, but it's very heavy on every aspect. I mean, it's a lot of very heavy talks, which the director tries to make it more dynamic by having some tracking shots around the actors or things like this, which is kind of device more prevalent in Indian cinema, and which sometimes make it a bit too much. It really tries to make it too serious and too much more important than what there is behind the scene and what it really means about the content of the film. So there is some weird effects of this emphasis when it comes to the direction on the very dubious story which is presented here. So for me, it's really one of the worst South Korean blockbuster of its time. Han Seung-ki here is playing the part the way he should, I guess. I mean, very seriously, with a lot of intent, with a lot of anger in his acting, these kind of things. I mean, that's certainly what Kang Woo-suk asked him to do, and that's certainly the tone of the film. So he is in the tone of the film, but that doesn't make for a good film at the end. So he can't really be blamed. I don't think the film failed because of him. I mean, it's obviously Kang Woo-suk who is really the mastermind behind it all, and who should be blamed for its failure. But Han Seung-ki doesn't really manage to save the film just by himself, obviously. Now, if I want to be kind on the film, if I want to say a few good words, I would probably say that when it comes to the flashback of the time of the king with the assassination of the last queen of Korea, I thought this reconstitution was decent. It was okay done, but that's certainly not enough to make Ambondo into a good film. I mean, it's really a bad film. It's one of the worst made by Korea during this boom of the early 2000s. So obviously I cannot advise you to watch that unless if you have an interest in what it means for Korean political conscience on this kind of ultra-nationalist fantasies. The same year, while Han Seung-ki was promoting a very strong unified Korea, he was also in an international co-production, a pretty complex and transnational co-production, because it's between Hong Kong, South Korea, China, and it's actually the adaptation of a Japanese story. And this movie is Battle of Wits, directed by Jacob Chung. Jacob Chung is actually one of those extremely good Hong Kong directors who, for whatever reasons, haven't been recognized either by fans, either by critics all over the world, and that's really a shame. I'm thinking of other Hong Kong directors such as Lawrence Hammond, for example, Lawrence Loh. Jacob Chung has done great films such as Last Eunuch in China, such as Lover's Tears, The Kid, Intimates, Cageman. He is a director who is more used to deal with social issues in Hong Kong, and that may explain maybe why he's not recognized that much by fans, as Hong Kong film fans tend to prefer action films first and foremost. But in any case, he is a very good actor. He has always a human touch in his films, whatever genre he touched on. And that's the case here once again with Battle of Wits, which is an adaptation of a manga, a Japanese manga, which itself is based on a Japanese book, and which takes place during the era of the warring kingdoms in China. There is a whole ecosystem, I would say, in Japan, doing things set in China with Chinese characters, that may be manga, that may be books, that may be films. We had, for example, a film in the 60s called The Great Wall about the first emperor in China. It was all shot in Japan with Japanese actors. So there is really this tradition, in a way, of Japan doing stories about China. And so that's the case with this manga, which was then adapted by Jacob Chung under this co-production agreement. There was a trend back then during this early mid-2000 of co-production. We really talk about one actually in the second part of this retrospective with Musa. Around the same time, we also had Seven Swords, directed by Choi Ark, which was also a co-production between Hong Kong, China, and South Korea. And usually, actually, it gave some pretty good results, at least in my eyes. And Battle of Wits is no exception on that front. What is the story of Battle of Wits? Pretty simple one, as it is the warring combatants, Warring Kingdoms era. We have one of those kingdoms which is going to invade one of its neighbor, on the main fortress on its way is under threat, obviously, and a man versed into strategy shows himself to the fortress and proposed to help in order to repel these invaders. This man, this very good strategy, is played by Andy Lau. We have a pretty good cast here with Andy Lau, with Chin Suho, with Wuma, with Fan Bingbing, and with An Sung Ki. An Sung Ki playing the general of the invading force. It's a movie which is really good to see. I mean, from a visual point of view, you can see that the money was well spent, with a very nice costume, with good sets, with enough of this kind of army movement. I mean, a lot of extra, these kind of things in the shots. That was the very first film of this nature for Jacob Chung, this kind of epic scale war films. So there were some doubt about if he could handle it correctly, and fortunately with this film he kind of dispelled them because he did a pretty good job. You have what you should expect from this kind of entertainment, with big battles, nice landscapes, these kind of things. So all in all, Battle of Wits is really a quality film. Now, I must confess, as far as I'm concerned, I have a few reservations about the film because I was expecting even more. I really like Jacob Chung. I like most of the actors who are involved in the film. I like the subject. I actually kind of like war film in general. But I'm always disappointed when it comes to war film about the way they deal with battle scenes, because most of the time we have this Braveheart way of dealing with battle scenes, where you have two big armies facing each other, and then they just rush at each other, and then they fight in a big mess, which is not the way strategy works. That's not how this kind of army fight. There are actually some strategies. They are organized in different units, these kind of things. I mean, there is much more than this just let's rush at each other's and let's beat the shit out of each other's way of doing things. But cinema seems unable to grasp that, and so we always end up with this kind of battles, which I find extremely frustrating and annoying. And unfortunately, that's the case a bit here. And we have a few tricks, we have a few traps, given that the main character is supposed to be so good at strategy. So there is a bit more thinking there, but I was expecting even more, to be honest. Given the subject, given who was involved behind it, I was expecting, from a strategy point of view, the film would go deeper and would be more interesting. And so that's that was a bit of disappointment for me on that front. But maybe that's my own fault, and I was expecting a bit too much. It remains that it is a quality film, as I said, and as I said, also Jacob Chung always has a human touch in every of his films, and that's the case also here in Battle of Wits. Even if it's mostly about battles, about a big fight and these kind of things, you still have a kind of a message against war at the same time, and I think that's really something which Jacob Chung put into the film. That's his own touch, and that was a welcome touch in my opinion. So despite my small reservation, it's still a very solid film, which obviously I would really recommend you to watch if you haven't seen it yet. Han Sung-ki, as I said, is playing the main general of the invading force. He has the commanding presence which is needed for the part. He is unfortunately dubbed in Mandarin, so we don't hear his own voice, which makes sense because he has quite a few lines, probably too much for his own command of Mandarin, so makes sense, but slightly disappointing. But anyway, he gives a good performance there, and it's pretty nice to see him facing Andy Lau, to have those two titans of Asian cinema sharing the screen together. That's a really nice thing to see. So yeah, as I said, good recommendation despite my own disappointment with this Battle of Wits. In 2007, Han Sung-ki is into May 18th, directed by Kim Ji-hoon. May 18th, it's the date of a very important and traumatic event in modern South Korean history, being the massacre, the Gwangju massacre, or the Gwangju uprising. There are different ways to call the event. You may already be aware of this event because it has been the subject of quite a few films, such as A Taxi Driver more recently. So what happened during the Gwangju massacre? So Gwangju is a city in the southwest of South Korea, and in 1980, following the death of Park Chung-hee, a new dictator took power. That was Chun Doo-hwan, and there were a lot of people protesting to have a new military dictator in place. And so there were such protests in Gwangju in the I think it was in May, obviously. I'm stupid. I should have I should have remembered, given the title of the film. So in May 1980 there were such protests in Gwangju, and the government deployed some airborne troops there in order to stop these protestations. And obviously airborne troops, they are not really the best one to bring peace, especially as they were told also that there was some kind of plot from communists in order to help North Korea, this kind of bullshit that they like to say back then. And so things got very ugly. The airborne troops shot into the crowd. There were a lot of people being beaten, some people being killed as well. That galvanized the people to go against those government troops, and they managed to repel them from the city. They took weapons, they established their own kind of government in Gwangju, but at the very end the army took back the city, and a few more people were killed in the process. And during all that time, the government tried to keep the information under control, basically avoiding it to spread all around Korea. They were fairly successful, but still there were some leaks one way or another, and so it became known later on during the following years, with people watching some watching some video of the event in an underground video gathering, these kind of things. And so it became known by the normal population of South Korea that there had been a massacre in Gwangju by the government, despite what they tried to, despite their own ways to try to prevent it. And that was a big problem for Chun Doo-hwan, that really created a lot of legitimacy difficulty for him. And that led also to 1987, when there were some new protests against the government. He didn't dare to send the troops this time, even if he considered it. But he didn't do it, and because he didn't do it, that really led the way for South Korea to become a real democracy. So Gwangju is a very important event in the modern history of South Korea and its democratic development. And it has been the subject of many films because many of the people at that time, the director at that time, were young, were teenagers, and they may have seen some of this videotape I was talking about. So they were quite influenced by this event, and so we have quite a few films during the 90s, during the 2000s, until this day, which talk about this important event. On May 18th is exactly that. It's a recreation of this fateful day when the airborne troops shot on the crowd, and how the people of Gwangju took arms in order to avenge themselves in a way, and to repel those government troops from their city. When it comes to the recreation of the event, I think the film is decent. It lacks in subtlety, but it does the job fairly okay. I mean, most of the events which are shown are indeed real. They indeed took place. So it's okay when it comes to the recreation of these events by itself. But there is a big but there. And the big but is, back in those days, so mid-2000, there was really a formula of Korean films dealing with historical or political events, which was to add a big dose of comedy. That was the case in, for example, the President's Barber or the President's Last Bang, about the assassination of Park Chung-hee. On May 18th followed this formula to the letter. And I think that's a problem. I think that's a problem because it distracts from the powerful drama that we are seeing. So here we have several characters who are there obviously to just being the comedy factor. They are clumsy, they are always making jokes, these kind of things. And it's just not fitting with what is being told in the film. So it's a real problem for me. I think it's a big distraction. It should not have been there. That there are a few comedy elements, why not? Because even in the most dramatic situation, in a way, there may be some funny interaction, there may be some funny situations, but here it's just overdone, and it's overdone as a formula. It's really just because there was this formula in place, and so this film do exactly the same. It lacks a real point of view on a strong personal touch from the director, and we are going to talk a bit more about Kim Ji-woon, and we will see that he is basically a yes man. I mean, he is not a great director at all, and so it's not surprising that he makes the wrong choices there, and that drags down the film. I would still say it's worth a watch, especially if you are interested in the political development of South Korea. But it's really a problem, whichever way you look at it. Ahn Sung-ki is playing a former military who is going to join with the crowd, the Gwangju crowd, and being one of the leaders, basically, of the insurrections. It's a fictional character. There were a few people who indeed had been in the military and would join the citizens of Gwangju. But as far as I know, none of them really became a leader in the movement. They did help to train some of those students and stuff. They did take part, but they were not really the driving force. So he is partly inspired from real characters, but there is also a bit of liberty taken there. But still, Ahn Sung-ki is a good thing to have here, because he really brings this seriousness which is needed given the material being dealt with, and which kind of counteract those comedy skits during the whole film. So he's a commanding presence. He has the authority. He has the acting shop, which help to make the drama endearing, and so that's a very good thing to have him here. But it's still not enough to prevent the film from being a mixed bag, unfortunately. So, not sure if I should really advise you to watch it. Yeah, if you are really an interest in South Korean politics and history, yeah, sure, have a look. Otherwise, not so much. There are actually better films when it comes to the Gwangju massacre, but we will have the opportunity to discuss it furthermore, because I'm preparing actually a few videos on this subject. So there will be better films to watch. Just wait for me to recommend them in some upcoming video. Now let's move to 2008 with a movie called The Divine Weapon, directed by Kim Yoo-jin. The Divine Weapon, it's the Singijeon. I'm probably pronouncing it badly, so I apologize for that. And these Singijeon are like medieval Katyusha, so the Stalin missile launcher, which were very popular in a way during the Second World War. And seems like it was some kind of version of that was invented during the medieval time in Korea. And what we have here is some Chinese invasion going on in Korea, and so the Korean heroes are going to use this device, this weapon, in order to repel them. But what is really the content of the film? So superficially, what we have here is the classic period action war film with those kind of battles, the kind of battles I was complaining about in Battle of Wits. So you got that exactly in The Divine Weapon. It's not a very good war film in my opinion. It's not bad. From a technical standpoint, it's okay. There is enough money on the screen. The sets, the costumes are okay, and even if it lacks any imagination when it comes to the battle scenes, it's not too badly done. It's just very average. It's nothing really outstanding in any way, and so it doesn't make for a film you will really get invested much. But what is at stake here is more than what meets the eye. In fact, this movie illustrates a phenomenon which is very strong, especially in Korea and a little bit in China as well, which is the idea that we are the first to have invented things. If you go to Korea, and that can be north or south, you will most likely hear this kind of discourse saying, oh, it's us who have invented this, we have invented this, we have invented this. And when they say that, it's usually in opposition to China. So we have invented this first, and then the Chinese took it. But it's us who created it first. And there is this discourse still nowadays in Korea. And it's part of a more general nation-building effort with the idea that Korea has its own specific culture, specific styles, specific ways of doing things, different from China, and that it had been like this for centuries, which is actually not that clear-cut. There were actually a lot of interactions between China and Korea for a very long time. Obviously, they were neighbors, they were next to each other, and so there were a lot of cultural and commercial exchange trade happening there. And if you look at it more into detail, the Chinese side actually has a better reason to say that they are indeed the one who have invented things. I mean, there are more things which have been indeed first made in China and then came into Korea than the other way around. But still, China also does the same thing, and we had such a controversy not a long time ago about kimchi, for example, with China saying they had invented it first. So all this is actually not really about history and more about the modern nation state and the need to have an identity, the need to have a specific identity which is different from the others. So it's very political and, in my opinion, very controversial, and to have it made into a film, I think, is not really the best way to make your case. I mean, when they do this kind of thing, it doesn't really make for good films. And we had a similar example just before with Anbando, and I think that's a bit the same problem going on here with The Divine Weapon. This message that we are we are different, and we have always been different, and we are in a way more creative, we are better than the others. It is not a good way to initiate movie making, in my opinion. That's not really the kind of message which I find appealing. So this Divine Weapon, I put it in the same category as Anbando. It's not as bad as Anbando, but it's still very generic, and the concept behind it for me is not positive, so I cannot really recommend the Divine Weapon. And I don't really have to recommend it for Han Sung-ki either, because he has a very small part. He's more like a deluxe cameo playing the king of Korea. He appears maybe max 2 minutes, maybe even less. Like, I don't remember precisely, but it's very, very, very short. He makes, I mean, he is convincing as the king of Korea, so nothing to fault there. But I mean, his part is just too small to really need to have any description or to want to watch the film just for him. So no need to bother with this Divine Weapon. We continue with a very different film made in 2009 called Fair Love and directed by Shin Yeon-sik. Fair Love is a movie about an old camera engineer, someone who repair old cameras, basically old style camera, not our kind of modern camera, digital camera, so the one before that. And he is going to reunite with one of his former friends who had stolen money from him. And this former friend is actually dying and is going to ask him to take care of his daughter. And Han Sung-ki is going to do just that, but he's going to take it maybe a bit too seriously because he's going to fall in love with this girl who is in mid-20s, early mid-20s. She's still studying at the university, and so they will have a romantic relationship, and at the heart of this relationship will be this age difference, because he's in his 60-something, I guess, or end of 50s, and she's in her 20s. So if you remember, I already talked a bit about this subject in Art Museum by the Zoo, where I was a bit surprised that the main character was interested in somebody as old as Han Sung-ki. But this was never really treated in Art Museum by the Zoo, and it is actually really the main core of Fair Love. So you have to give credit to Fair Love to deal with this subject in a serious way. It's not your typical Korean romantic comedy. We don't really have the usual structure from this kind of films. The comedy part is also fairly limited. So it's a serious romantic drama. I think that would be more accurate when it comes to its genre. And so it's a film I would have liked to appreciate. Unfortunately, I think it's a semi-failure, and there is a good reason for that. It's that it's too artificial. The relationship between the two characters is too artificial. Basically, as soon as Han Sung-ki enters in the life of the girl, she falls in love with him. Just like this, immediately. They didn't really know each other before. She had seen him maybe once or twice when she was a teenager, but that's it. But so when she finally sees him now, then she falls in love. And I found it very hard to believe, very hard to swallow. I just cannot believe in it. I think that's a big flaw of the script there. They should have been at least for some scenes where they would have created a link, where they would have started developing these feelings, and not just directly like, oh, we are going to be together because we love each other, which seems extremely artificial to me. I think it's like the script forced the two characters to be together because otherwise there would be no story, so it has to happen. So let's just go over with, but it doesn't work this way. It doesn't help you to believe in what is being presented on the screen. So that was a problem, but the second problem which comes with it is that there is basically no sparks between Han Sung-ki and his female partner. So once again, that doesn't help for you to believe that they really are in love with each other, and that this romantic relationship is serious and has to be able to fight against the pressure, the peer pressure of all these people, the social pressure of all these people around who are condemning this relationship because of the age difference. And this original flaw, I think, makes the film not convincing. And it's also a pretty long film, almost 2 hours, which is way too long for what it tries to say, and especially as it has shortened some parts which should have been there in the first place. So the problem lies in the script, in my opinion, and a bit in the casting. And it's really unfortunate because it tries to deal with its subject in a serious way, and there are indeed a few things which deal with the subject the right way, I think. And at the same time, you also have a very strong performance from Han Sung-ki. You see, he really enjoyed to be able to have such a part, and when he really starts to express his feelings during the later part of the film, he really makes it very convincing, and he gives a very good performance there. But as I said, because of the flow of the story and the script, I think his efforts go a bit to waste, unfortunately. And so at the end of the day, this Fair Love is a disappointment, made especially painful given that the involvement, the really serious involvement of Han Sung-ki. But that's how it is. A movie which should have been good, which could have been good, but which is not that successful at the end. For the year 2011, we are back with our favorite director of this video, Kim Ji-woon, so Mr. May 18th, with a film called Sector 7. Sector 7 takes place on an oil rig platform. We have several people working on this platform, including Ah Ji-won and Han Sung-ki, and they are going to be under the threat of some kind of a sea monster who is going to kill each member of the platform one by one. Obviously, from this very quick synopsis, you can recognize a low quality copy of Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien. We had hundreds of such films being produced since the original film was released. And there have been actually quite a few with this kind of sea atmosphere. So instead of space happening in the sea, with Leviathan, for example, by George Cosmatos, which really applied the Alien formula, but under the sea. So here it's not under the sea, it's on the sea, but otherwise it's exactly the same formula, the same concept. If you have seen Alien or any of these smaller budget copy, or even sometimes some big blockbuster copies as well, you won't be surprised by anything in Sector 7. I mean, it's as generic as it comes. There is really nothing outstanding there. And I think it's made even worse by the direction of Kim Ji-woon. Kim Ji-woon, as I said, is not a good director, and I think it's even more obvious here than in May 18th. The direction looks very TV style, with very bright lights everywhere, with very dubious CGI, especially when it comes to the monster, of course. And there is nothing interesting there. Everything has been done already to death. Ah Ji-won plays, of course, a kind of a copy of Replay. She's actually okay. I think she's decent there, given the limited amount of interesting material she has to deal with. But she has a pretty good look for this kind of part. And Sung-ki also is okay. Is playing a character which is like a mix between Dallas, so this kind of fatherly authority figure, but at the same time with a bit of Ash, because he has a responsibility in the creation of the monster. And it certainly brings a bit of seriousness and class to this film, which otherwise is as generic as it comes. The monster also doesn't have a great design, in my opinion. It's almost comedic sometimes. Maybe that was the intent of Kim Ji-woon. He cannot resist having a comedy in his films. I don't know, but it's really not inspiring in any way. It's basic, low quality copy of Alien, this Sector 7. So really no need for you to watch it unless you have a fetish for this kind of poor version of Alien. In this case, well, go ahead. You may find what you like, but otherwise don't bother. Fortunately, the same year, in 2011, Han Sung-ki was in a much better film called Unbound, directed by Jung Ji-young. If you remember, Jung Ji-young is another director we talked in the second video of this retrospective. He is the guy behind North Korean Partisans in the South. He is also the director of White Badge. So two very good films, and he came back after a long pause of more than 10 years with Unbound, which is based on a real case which happened around the time of a bit earlier, of course, of the release of this film with a mathematics professor, a mathematics teacher, who had noticed there was a problem with the entrance exam of his university, and so he had pointed to the authority of the university this problem, and he was demoted for that. And of course, he was not happy about it. He sued the university for that, and he actually lost. And he was even more frustrated by this result, and he actually threatened the judge with a crossbow. And so following that action, he was once again back into the court, and he had to defend against this accusation of having attacked this judge. And so in the film we are exactly at this stage, and he's going to team with a lawyer in order to try not to be condemned for this action. And the film is really an all-out attack from Jung Ji-young on the judiciary in South Korea, basically showing that the judges are not really true to the spirit of the law and the constitution, that there is a lot of connections between elites in order to keep their own influence and power, these kind of things. Jung Ji-young has always been quite political and quite critical of government and politics in general. So it's not a surprise to see him going in this direction with this film. And he makes certainly some very good points. It's also helped by Han Sung-ki, which is at his best, basically. He really has a lot of things to do in this film. He is given a lot of opportunities to express his character and to give a very impressive performance, and he certainly does. His character is very interesting because he's someone who has very strong principles and he never give up on them, and so of course that makes from some pleasant caustic exchanges between him and the judges. It works really, really well. I really like the film. I think it's one of the very best films from Han Sung-ki during this period of the 2000s. Having said that, I was a bit surprised, even if I expected it from Jung Ji-young, I was a bit surprised how aggressive he was toward the judiciary in modern Korea. I'm sure there are a lot of problems in the judiciary of Korea nowadays, and there are problems in all the judiciary all over the world. I mean, it's the justice of men. There are always problems, there are always contradictions, there are always things which are not done with the fairness that we want it to happen. So it's certainly legit criticism from him, but at the same time, I found him to be very, very critical, very hard with the South Korean judiciary nowadays, while there are certainly have been a lot of improvement compared to the time of the dictatorship, when the judiciary was really under the orders of the power. There may still be some kind of problems nowadays in South Korea, but it has certainly improved, and so I was a bit surprised that he was hitting so hard with contemporary judiciary, and I thought it would have made more sense in a way to hit that hard if it had been against the judiciary of the time of the dictatorship. Well, that's just my own reservation there. It's a very small reservation. I still think that Unbound is a quality film, which certainly deserves a watch, and as I said, which has one of the very best Han Sung-ki performance of the 2000s. Let's continue with Kim Ji-hoon with a movie made in 2012 called The Tower. I don't know why Han Sung-ki kept working with Kim Ji-hoon. As I said, he's a bad director, but he came again and again, and so after Sector 7, after May 18th, he did The Tower. The Tower is your typical disaster film. It has all the ingredients, the usual formula of such films, like the Towering Inferno. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. Here we have a luxury complex, a luxury building which has been built, and obviously there is a problem happening, and then a lot of people have to evacuate, and the firemen came to the rescue, and Sung Ki playing the captain of the firemen. And so we have all the kind of different characters involved who have to survive, and all of them in a way representing some aspect of South Korean society. It's as predictable as it can be. I mean, it's exactly following every trope of this kind of disaster film, so you won't have any surprise of any kind there. But if you compare it to Sector 7, when it was just applying the Alien formula, I would say that Kim Ji-woon is a little bit more successful here, dealing with a disaster film genre rather than the low copy of Alien genre. So it makes for a slightly more decent viewing. He's also trying to add a little bit of political commentary, especially with the class differences between the rich and the poor in South Korea. But it's very heavy, and while it certainly has some hint of truth, it's just too heavy and lack any kind of subtlety in order to really convince. And it's all about the entertainment anyway. With a bit better special effects than Sector 7 comparatively. It's not that bad, but it's not that good either. It's just a very average film. If you are really curious about seeing what South Korea can do when it comes to disaster film, then yeah, have a look at it. It's not that bad. But once again, as usual with this director, it's not going to leave a very strong impression in your mind after watching this tower. We move to the year 2014 with The Divine Move, directed by Cho Bain-gu. Another Divine film, and it's not the last one. There will be another one later. This one has nothing to do with the story of Divine Weapon. The Divine Move is about a player of Go, so this board game, Asian board game, and the main character has his brother taking part in an underground Go game, and he asks him to help him by giving him some hints, by giving him some advices, because he is supposed to be a good player at Go, and so he accepts to do it, but unfortunately they are busted. Then the brother is killed, and that's this poor guy who didn't want at the origin to be part of this scheme, who is accused of the murder of his brother, and is sent to jail. And there he prepares for his revenge, and when he comes out from the prison, he starts to gather a team of people in order to get his revenge from the crime lord who was responsible for the death of his brother. So the whole thing about the board game on the Go is really just an excuse. It doesn't have much to do with the film, and what we have with The Divine Move is actually one of those fairly typical Korean revenge film. This kind of revenge film has become a staple of South Korean cinema during that time, alongside the serial killer film. That's the two which became extremely popular in Korea and outside of Korea as well on the international market. But this one just has nothing really outstanding or no personal identity which would make it more interesting than most of the other films which had been done so far. It's not that bad because from a technical point of view, The Divine Move is quite okay. I mean, the photography is well done. It's good to look at. The direction does the job. The actors give, in general, okay performance. I mean, it's okay done on all levels when it comes to the technical requirement, but it's just very generic and predictable when it comes to the story itself. And so you are never really invested in the characters or in the story, and it's a decent viewing, but yeah, nothing outstanding in any way. Han Seung-ki is one of the members of this team. He is actually a blind Go player, and he's going to assist the main character in his vengeance. He's a bit like the old wise man of the team. He's okay, really nothing bad about his performance. I think he does a good job, but his presence, while a good thing for the film, he doesn't have enough material or enough things to do in order to elevate the film one step higher. So it's okay. He's doing a good job, but nothing that outstanding, which is basically what we can say of the film in general. So as you can see, many of the films of Han Seung-ki during that time period are not that great. Fortunately, in 2014, Han Seung-ki got to work once again with Im Kwon-taek. Im Kwon-taek, who had given him some of his best parts during the first phase of his career, and also a bit later during the 90s, with a movie called Revivre. It's actually a French title. The Korean title is Hwajong, and it's actually the very last film by Im Kwon-taek. Im Kwon-taek, who is one of the best, if not the very best, South Korean cinema director. Here, Han Seung-ki is playing the head of a cosmetic company, a fairly big cosmetic company, and he is actually in a tough situation because his wife is dying, and he has to take care of her during this very difficult time. And at the same time that he has to deal with this personal drama, he also has an attraction, a physical attraction for one of his new employee, a younger girl who is quite successful also in his cosmetic company. So yeah, there is a little bit of the subject of fair game here in the part with this girl being attracted to Han Seung-ki and Han Seung-ki being attracted to her. But we are dealing here with Im Kwon-taek. We are dealing with somebody who is, as I say, the very best the very best film director of South Korea. So he's someone who is able to put much more subtlety, much more humanity in his characters and his stories. And so we have a result which is much more interesting, much more mature than Fair Love comparatively. First, we basically have two films, even if they actually combine to give a powerful statement. But on one side, we have the trauma, the drama of having to deal with somebody with who you have spent quite a long time of your life, and who is unable to take care of herself, who is also in pain, and so you have to deal with that aspect of life, to be with this person in order to make the best of this very difficult situation. And that provides some very powerful feelings. There are really some scenes which are very strong, very touching when Han Seung-ki has to take care of his wife. It's hard not to feel anything when you are seeing things like this. And at the same time, you have this kind of potential romantic relationship, which is established much better than in Fair Love. I complained that in Fair Love the characters were immediately in love with each other and it didn't feel right. There is no such problem here. On the contrary, Im Kwon-taek emphasized very well about small details, small things which show that there is an attraction, that there is something between the two, even if they don't dare to say it openly. So it's done with much more care and much more ability compared to what happened in Fair Love. And of course, if you combine those two storylines, you have an interesting commentary about what it is to be in a couple, what the couple relationship. I mean, the fact that at some point you may get some attraction for somebody else, that you may be facing this kind of tough situation, and it's not just all the fairy tale relationship where you fall in love and then everything is happy forever after. I mean, it's not that simple, and of course when you get a bit more mature, when you're a bit older, you realize these kind of things, and so that's what Im Kwon-taek says here. And as usual with him, he doesn't really give a clear-cut solution or a moralistic stance saying you should do this or you should not do that. He just shows the reality of what it is, and then you are just left to your own conclusion based on your own moral standards. So very interesting take on this subject from Im Kwon-taek. At the same time, you have also a little bit, it's less present compared to the personal drama which is at stake. But you have a little bit of a commentary about appearance in South Korean society with this wife of Han Sung-ki having a cancer. Of course, she's losing her hair and a lot of these kind of things, which makes her, from an appearance point of view, kind of damaged good. And at the same time, you have this very pretty girl in the company, and so how that affects you on being the setting for this story being in a cosmetic company. You have a more general commentary about the importance of appearance in South Korean society, which applies also in most of our modern society as well. It's not something which is too present in the film, it's just in the background. And I think it adds one layer of interest to Revivre. What is also a bit surprising, in my opinion, is that compared to what Im Kwon-taek does, it's a bit further from his usual kind of settings. Im Kwon-taek, he likes to have his film in the south of South Korea, in the countryside, with characters who are a bit aside from society, not exactly your average guy in a corporation, in a chaebol or whatever, your office lady or this kind of employee. But that's what it does here. I mean, it happens in Seoul. It's in this kind of a modern company, so it's mostly office where the action takes place, and that's kind of unusual for him. That's not his usual way of doing. It's not his usual kind of setting. So it's a bit surprising to see him evolve in this world. But at the end of the day, he provide a very strong drama, which is certainly still relevant nowadays, and will keep being relevant in the future, certainly. And it's very good that he finished his career, because that's his very last film, as far as I know. It's good that he finished on such a high note. It's not his best film, far from it. Taebaek Mountain or a few others are certainly better, in my opinion. But it's hard to be in the very top of Im Kwon-taek film. I mean, he has done so many good films that there is no shame to be in the lower bracket of a good Im Kwon-taek film anyway. So really a big recommendation. Of course, there is always recommendation when it's Im Kwon-taek films. And Han Sung-ki is really perfect here once again. That's when he has this kind of director that is able to give the best of him, the best of himself. And so very strong performance, very strong acting by Han Sung-ki for this Revivre. Almost must-see film, I would say, if you like Im Kwon-taek and Han Sung-ki. We move to something completely different, made in 2015. It's The Last Nights, directed by Kazuaki Kiriya. The Last Nights is really a very surprising hybrid film directed by a Japanese, as you can see from the name of its director. It's also actually an adaptation, a transposition of the very famous story of the 47 Ronins, but an adaptation in a more Western, dark fantasy, medieval settings. And that's exactly what we have. We have a transposition of this very Japanese story in a Western setting, with a bit also of American touch, I would say, in the fact that the casting is extremely multi-racial. You have people from Middle East, you have people who are black, who are white, you have all kind of colors, which in a way is more indicative of American multiculturalism rather than a European dark fantasy setting. But I think it's actually a pretty good idea, because the movie by itself is an hybrid thing, having a Japanese story set in a Western world. So if you are going for the hybrid, you better go with it fully. And so that's what it does here with such a very diverse casting, and I think it works pretty well. It works to the benefit of the film. That makes him also have a lot of pretty good actors. We have Morgan Freeman, we have Han Sung-ki, we have Kai Vaughan, and a few other supporting actors who are pretty good as well, and who are doing a good job, and who also provide this diversity, which is one of the characteristics of the film. Usually when it comes to Hollywood taking stories from elsewhere, and especially in Asia, and making it its own, the result is very often disappointing, to say the least, if not insulting for those stories on what they meant. But surprisingly, with this Last Night, I think the result is actually decent. It works pretty well, which is surprising, because it's this story of the 47 Ronins is considered as the kind of ultimate ideal of the Bushido spirit, even if it's in a very fantasized, in a way, version. But so to see it works fairly well in this Western environment is a bit surprising, but a welcome surprise. That probably comes in part because of a nice artistic direction, with a good mood being created, with a lot of fog, with a nice palace, and this kind of dark fantasy setting in general, which also takes a bit from other culture. It's not all Western. There is a bit of Middle East Persian elements as well, which makes it quite interesting, and it has its own personality compared to many of the films I've been talking about so far, which didn't have any personality at all and which were very generic. This one managed to have its own identity, and so that's already a pretty good thing which can be said about the film. Performances are all around okay. Han Sung-ki is playing the father-in-law of the main bad guy, who is also some kind of advisor to the emperor. Good part, good performance. And what is interesting here, comparatively to Battle of Wits, it's really him who is speaking, who is giving his line in English. He's not completely at ease, to be honest. You can feel he's not super confident in his English, but it's still okay, and it's nice to hear him talk English. So I still enjoy to see him being in this film, and giving a solid performance as well. You have also a few fights there and there, as is expected from story about the 47 Ronins, mostly at the end, obviously, which are decent. It's nothing. It's not a masterpiece, far from it, but it's just a decent, okay film. And in this retrospective, in the third part of this retrospective, it's already pretty good to have a decent film. So I would give it a small recommendation, actually. I enjoyed watching it, and hopefully that will be the same for you. Still in 2015, Han Sung-ki was in a much smaller budget production called Love Hand, directed by Lu Zhang. Contrary to what the name of the director may imply, the film is not a Chinese film, it's a Korean film. I'm not completely sure, but I think Lu Zhang is actually a Korean from Chinese origin, or he is a Chinese but from Korean descent, something, one or the other, I'm not sure. But anyway, the film was made in Korea, so it's mostly a Korean production. It's a weird film, to be honest. Low budget. We have Han Sung-ki being in. It's not very clear if it's a psychiatric asylum or just an hospital. But anyway, he's an old man who has problems, mental problems. And the beginning of the film plays like a romance. Then it's about the shooting of a film. Then it becomes more like the kind of a road trip in a way, and then it becomes a story of murder. So it jumps from one thing to another, which makes it interesting at the beginning because you never know really what to expect. But the more you go along, and the more you realize that there is not really any clear-cut idea of what the director wants to say, and so you lose a bit of the steam and you lose a bit of the interest the more you go in the film. It really feels like a film which has been made at the end of university or a film school, so the end of your training at the film school. It has really this vibe, trying to look artistic, trying to put as much as the director wants to tackle, but at the end, as the film is fairly short, it lacks a bit of link between the different style that he's trying to combine. It makes for a slightly frustrating experience. Han Sung-ki's performance is also in the same spirit. It's quite okay at the very beginning, but the more the film moves on, the less interesting he is. I think he's still okay even at the very end. I mean, he doesn't do a bad job, but not his best performance either for a film which is original in a way, but I wouldn't say it's a successful film. Another unsuccessful film is called The Hunt, directed by Lee Woon-chul in 2016. The Hunt is the story of a group of hunters, so going into a forest, and they find some gold there and they want to keep it for themselves, and things get quickly ugly with somebody being killed, and then it transforms into a hunt trying to kill the witness so that they can keep the gold for themselves. It's a bit of similar problem as in Love Hand, meaning that there are like two films, two genera which the director wants to do at the same time, and because he cannot really concentrate on any of the two, it ends up being disappointing on both aspects. So on one side you have a bit of a survival film, a bit Rambo style, with the characters having to survive and having to get rid of people hunting him, this kind of survival. And at the same time you have a wannabe psychological drama about this group dynamic and how people end up doing horrible things when they are under this pressure and when there is this kind of greed coming into play. But as I said, both aspects are not handled very convincingly. The the psychological drama part, it doesn't go very deep, not deep enough to have a real commentary about human nature, contrary to what the director seems to want to do. On the survival aspect, I mean, it's okay, but still quite lower quality compared to the best film when it comes to this kind of subject. So at the end, you are not really satisfied with any of those two aspects, and you are just a bit disappointed by what you are seeing. And what makes it even more disappointing, in my opinion, is Han Sung-ki, who here looks like a homeless guy. I really don't like the look he has here, and I don't think it's very convincing as this survivalist type of guy. He's getting a bit old by this point, obviously. He was already old in the previous film of this series, and so here it's a bit too much when it comes to the suspension of disbelief, in my opinion. And so a movie which at the end is unsuccessful on all fronts. We move to 2018 with a film by Kim Ki-duk called The Time of Humans. Kim Ki-duk, fairly famous South Korean director, known for his artistic side and also his interest for violence and sex. When it comes to his filmography, I'm far from having seen all the film he has done, but my own judgment so far is that it was much more interesting when he was doing film at the beginning of his career, and the more his career continued, the less interesting his film became. That's my own take, and I believe The Time of Human may be his very last film, and certainly, as far as I'm concerned, that's his worst film. I think it's almost a disaster. I mean, it's almost in the same category as Anbando, but for different reasons. Obviously, they are very different films. The Time of Humans, we have a cruise boat with a lot of different people being on this cruise. And then suddenly, for reasons unknown, they become... They are in the air, they become disconnected from the world in some kind of parallel universe on their own on this boat, and they have to survive, and then basically all hell all hell break loose, and you have different people wanting to become in power, and then struggles, fight, violence, sexual abuse, all you can expect. And so obviously it's pretty simple to get that what Kim Ki-duk is trying to say here is a commentary about humanity in general, how humanity, once they are out of society, when there is no more rules and stuff, how they create this kind of competing powers, how they end up killing each other, so they end up recreating these kind of things which are part of our human society in general. Which, I mean, why not? The subject by itself is not wrong. I think there could be indeed an interesting commentary about human nature, about politics, about all these kind of things with such a subject. But the problem here is that I don't feel like the commentary given by Kim Ki-duk is very deep, and he seems more interested in having as much violence and sex that he can. I mean, his goal is to put as much violence and sex as he can, and that's pretty much it. So by pretending to condemn this aspect, he is actually trying to make it more attractive for the audience, or to shock the audience, but in a very superficial way. So the political and human discourse is very secondary, and it's just trying to shock you and show boobies and these kind of things. So it feels very pretentious at the end, given the lack of very smart or deep discourse from Kim Ki-duk. And Han Sung-ki doesn't really elevate the level of the film, but once again, it's not necessarily his fault, it's more like the part he's playing. He doesn't say any word actually from the whole film, and he's a mix once again between a survivalist from The Hunt and God. Is basically like some kind of personification of God at the same time. As I said, the film is very pretentious, so you have a bit of religious, biblical aspect also in it, but in a very superficial way. And so Han Sung-ki is in the tone of the film in a way. He is what Kim Ki-duk wants him to be, but as the film is lacking any coherent speech, or as the film is very superficial and pretentious, he cannot really save it just by his presence, unfortunately. And so it's a very unpleasant film, I think, which potentially could have been much better if he had tackled such a subject at the beginning of his career, in my opinion, once again. But now he was damaged good when it comes to a director. You are probably also aware that around that time they were starting to have some strong rumors about the way he was treating his actresses with sexual harassment and abuse. So there is a bit of that vibe also in this film here, so that makes for a really unpleasant viewing. And the last film from this retrospective is from 2019, and it's called The Divine Fury, directed by Kim Joo-won. So the third of this Divine series, and as I told you, while the Divine Weapon was not great, while the Divine Move was not great, the Divine Fury is not great either. It's a very weird mix with Han Sung-ki playing a priest, an exorcist, who is going to get the help from a former MMA fighter in order to fight all the evil forces which are in the world. So it's a mix of The Exorcist, William Friedkin's The Exorcist, with action, martial art action. As you can guess from this description, having these two kind of genre and a style of films seems kind of weird, and it would not really mix harmoniously, and indeed it doesn't. I can guarantee you it doesn't. It's not all bad though. There are a few funny ideas there and there. I liked, for example, the hideout of the bad guys, which is a club. So you have a bit of a club and satanic elements in there as well, so that makes for a fairly interesting visual. You have also actually a very good performance from Han Sung-ki, with a bit like Father Merrin from The Exorcist, and he's given enough material to make something interesting from his character and to give some strong performance, and he is really an asset for the film. He's almost the saving grace of the film, but it's not enough to compensate the flow of the story and this difficulty to manage to mix these two different aspects, to have a bit of psychological horror and at the same time some entertaining action. Doesn't really work. But of these three Divine films, I would still say it's probably the most interesting one, thanks to Han Sung-ki's performance. So if you are ready to go into strange world of filmmaking, where people try to combine very different style, it may be worth a try. It's not that bad. It won't be great, but it's still watchable to some extent. And that's it. That's the very end of this Han Sung-ki filmography. It doesn't mean that Han Sung-ki stopped with this film. Actually, he's still working to these days, and after this film he actually did 2 more, In the Name of the Sun and Paper Flower, 2 drama which unfortunately I haven't been able to watch with English subtitles. I could have watched them without subtitles, but as they seem to be fairly serious drama with a lot of dialogues, I thought that would not be proper to watch them without subtitles just in order to do this retrospective. So maybe if I catch up some of those films, those 2 more recent films or some older films he has done on which so far I haven't been able to watch, I may do an additional video the same way I did with Chow Yun-fat, if I find those films interesting enough. If all those films I watch I find them dull or bad, I must confess I'm not going to bother doing a video about it, because the whole concept of this retrospective and the whole concept of this channel in general is to try to make you interested, to make you curious about good films, and not to try to advise you to watch bad ones. So I hope this retrospective has fulfilled this ambition, that some of the films I've talked about will get some interest from you, and you will watch some of them and you will love some of them. Until then, I will keep doing some other videos, some future retrospective as well, and we will certainly see each other again on the channel in the coming future. So until then, watch many films and take care.